Inside his tent, Marcus tries to write his mother about the bridge, but the words keep drifting to the village they burned. He scores them out and starts again. This is Compass and Codex. Never stop exploring unknown worlds. And now, Eagle's Edge, a story of Rome, Gaul, and the making of a soldier.
From Book 3.
The Winter Camp. Chapter 14. The Letter. Scene 1. The oil lamp's flame danced across the wax tablet's smooth surface, sending long shadows stretching toward the corners of the papilio tent. Marcus hunched over his small writing table, his shoulders tight with the day's labor, stylus gripped firmly in fingers that still ached from the cold morning water. Outside, the Legion's evening routines continued, the distant hammering from the forge, laughter from a nearby contubernium tent, the methodical scrape of pugio against armor as his tentmates performed their nightly maintenance. But inside his leather shelter, the world narrowed to the tablet before him, and the letter he had promised his mother, now weeks overdue. His hand hovered over the wax, hesitating before committing the first line. Where to begin? The camp, the weather, the food, the bridge. The bridge. Marcus pressed the stylus into the wax, the tip leaving a clean furrow as he wrote, "To Mother, from the banks of the Rhine. Our general has ordered us to build what no man thought possible." The words came more easily after that initial sentence. His stylus moved with growing confidence across the tablet, describing Caesar's impossible command, a bridge across the Rhine in just 10 days. And how the Legion had already accomplished it in 8. He wrote of the massive oak timbers hauled from forests 5 miles distant, of the precision with which they had been notched and joined, of how the entire structure seemed to rise from the water as though summoned by the gods themselves. The central span alone uses 3 different joining techniques, he wrote, his stylus flowing across the wax with the same certainty that had guided his hands while working. The main beams are secured with double notches that lock together, like the fingers of 2 hands gripping across a chasm. The diagonal supports connect with lapped joints reinforced by rope bindings that the engineers can tighten as the timber swells from river water. He paused, picturing his mother's face as she read these descriptions. Would she imagine the rhythmic cadence of pile driving that had echoed across the river for days? The methodical thunk, thunk, thunk as teams of men drove the foundation timbers deep into the riverbed. Would she understand how the sound had become part of them, as much a component of their days as the trumpet signals or the shouted commands? A frown creased his forehead. His hand had drifted to the right edge of the tablet, where the wax had already been scored through with 2 heavy lines, evidence of his previous attempt at this letter. The crossed-out words were still partially legible. Burned to the ground. Nothing but ashes now. Marcus's jaw tightened. He set his stylus down and reached for the small flask of watered wine sitting beside his lamp. The liquid burned pleasantly down his throat, warming the empty place behind his breastbone that always seemed to open when he thought about the village. They had taken it at dawn, just 2 days after completing the bridge. A small Gallic settlement nestled in a valley 5 miles east of the Rhine, not even proper Belgic territory, but German lands claimed by the Gauls years earlier. 20 huts, a central meeting house, a smithy, fields of barely ripened wheat surrounding the village like a golden sea. Caesar had ordered it destroyed as a message to the tribes beyond the Rhine, a demonstration of what awaited any who challenged Rome's advance. No prisoners taken except 3 men old enough to carry word of what they had witnessed back to their people. Marcus lifted his stylus again, the point hovering just above a fresh line on the tablet. We encountered a German settlement last week. The smoke rose so thick it blocked the sun for hours. The words came faster now, almost against his will. The children cried as their mothers dragged them from burning huts. One boy, no more than 5, stood watching the flames with such stillness it frightened me more than his screams would have. The smell. He stopped, suddenly aware that his breathing had quickened, his free hand curled into a fist so tight the knuckles had whitened. The memory rose before him with perfect clarity, the acrid taste of smoke on his tongue, the strange, almost sweet smell of charring grain, the heavier odor of rotting straw from the village's animal pens, the wailing of a woman who had thrown herself to the ground when her husband was cut down trying to protect their doorway, the hollow, rhythmic sound of a child's head striking packed earth as the boy rocked back and forth, watching his world disappear. Marcus's stylus jabbed into the wax with such force that the tip dug a deep furrow across 2 lines of text. With deliberate, angry strokes, he scratched through the paragraph he had just written, the stylus moving in sharp, diagonal lines that obliterated each word, each phrase, each truth he couldn't bear to send home. His hand was trembling when he finished, small beads of sweat standing out along his hairline despite the tense, cool interior. The destroyed paragraph lay before him, a tangle of gouged wax that told its own story of the truth buried beneath. He set the stylus down again and reached for the small object that lay beside his lamp, his father's military medallion, the bronze disc worn smooth by years of handling. The lamplight caught its surface, revealing the eagle embossed on one side, the Legion number on the other. His thumb traced the familiar contours, feeling the slight depression where the metal had been dented in some long-ago battle his father had never described in detail. What would his father have written about the village? Would he have included the truth in a letter home? Or would he too have crafted careful half-truths that revealed the glory of Roman arms while concealing their bloody cost? Marcus turned the medallion over in his palm, watching the light play across its surface. His father had carried this through his 25 years of service, had survived wounds and fevers and battles beyond counting. Had he also carried the memories of villages burned, of children made orphans, of fields salted so thoroughly that nothing would grow for a generation? And if so, where had he placed those memories so they wouldn't poison everything else? With a deep breath, Marcus reached for his stylus once more. The wax tablet had little space left. He would need to finish soon or begin again on a fresh surface. The weather has turned cooler, he wrote, the letters forming with careful precision. The nights bring frost that melts by mid-morning. Lucius sends his greetings. He has been assigned to water duty for the next week after losing a bet with the blacksmith's apprentice. The food remains the same. Bread harder than the Legion's discipline, cheese that could anchor a trireme, and enough posca to pickle a man's insides. He smiled despite himself, picturing his mother's expression as she read these lines, the small shake of her head, the way her mouth would quirk at one corner while she pretended disapproval. She would show the letter to the neighbors, emphasizing the technical description of the bridge, skipping over the complaints about camp food. "My son, the engineer," she would say, though he was neither engineer nor immunist, despite Appius's recognition of his talent. "The work continues," he added. "We have begun construction of a proper castra on the eastern bank, larger than our marching camp, with stone foundations for the principia and permanent granaries. I have been assigned to the drainage crew, digging the channels that will carry rainwater away from the storehouses. It is not glorious work, but necessary, not glorious, not even especially skilled, but safe, a word he couldn't write but that his mother would hear in every line. The letter had accomplished its purpose without revealing the truth that sat like a stone in his chest. That Rome's glory came with a cost measured in burned villages and orphaned children, in men following orders they couldn't question, and building a world on the ashes of what had been before. Marcus signed his name with a simple flourish, then carefully folded the tablet, pressing the wax surfaces together to seal his edited truth inside. He reached for the small leather purse that contained his monthly pay, minus the deductions for food and equipment, and extracted 3 copper coins. These he pressed into the folded wax, a tangible piece of himself to accompany his words home. Outside, the hammering from the forge had ceased. The laughter had given way to the softer sounds of men returning to their tents, to the final duties of the day before sleep claimed them. Marcus set his completed letter aside and reached for the earlier drafts, the abandoned attempts that contained the truths he couldn't send. These he held over the lamp's flame, watching as the wax softened, then melted, dripping onto the small flame in sullen, reluctant tears. The fire flared briefly with each drop, then subsided, consuming his honesty one charred word at a time. When the last fragment had melted away, Marcus sat back, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. His letter to his mother lay completed beside him, a careful construction of half-truths and edited memories that revealed nothing of what the campaign had truly cost. A bridge between his two worlds, spanning the distance between the boy who had left Mediolanum and the man who was emerging from the crucible of Caesar's war. He hoped it would be strong enough to bear the weight of all it couldn't say. Scene 2. Hey, a quick note before we get back to the story. Our ebooks are now on Amazon. In Book 1 of Colony in Danger, the colony is starving. The Queen won't say why. And the young fire ant sorting seeds is the only one asking the right questions. In Book 1 of the Lego fan fiction series, Brickhaven, he built an entire town out of bricks. Then he woke up as a minifig, but his own creations have now turned on. And in Book 1 of Eagle's Edge, farm boy Marcus took the Roman oath at 16. He had joined Caesar's army and must prepare to be part of the world's greatest military machine. But by sundown he was certain he had made a terrible mistake. If you want the full adventure without the weekly wait, grab your copy on Amazon now. Find the link in the show description. Go check them out. Okay, back to the story. The tent flap rustled behind him, the leather shifting with the careful movement of someone who knew exactly how much noise it could make before drawing attention. Marcus didn't turn. He had grown familiar enough with his contubernium mates to recognize their individual entrances. But the footsteps that followed were lighter, more deliberate, not the confident stride of a Roman legionary, but the measured placement of a man who never forgot he was a captive. Marcus glanced over his shoulder to find Ambrix standing just inside the tent entrance, his dark eyes fixed on the wax tablet with undisguised curiosity. For a moment, neither moved. Marcus sat with his stylus still in hand, his freshly written letter open before him. Ambrix remained by the entrance, his posture betraying the careful calculation of boundaries that had become second nature since his capture. Not too close, not too far, the precise distance that declared both his presence and his understanding of his status. Then, with a gesture so slight it might have been imagined, Ambrix raised his eyebrows in silent question. Marcus nodded once, granting permission for the Gallic youth to approach. Ambrix moved to the opposite side of the small writing table and settled himself cross-legged on Marcus's bedroll, not presuming to sit on the second folding stool that belonged to Lucius. His eyes never left the wax tablet, studying the neat rows of Latin characters with the focused attention of a man trying to decipher a puzzle beyond his understanding. "What?" Marcus began, then stopped, remembering the language barrier between them. He set his stylus down and raised his hands, palm up in the universal gesture of questioning. Ambrix responded immediately, his own hand moving to point at the tablet, then back to Marcus, his expression making the unspoken question clear. "What are you writing?" The communication between them had evolved over weeks of shared captivity, from the frustrated gestures of mutual incomprehension to a rudimentary pidgin of expressions, sounds, and pantomime. Ambrix had proven an apt pupil, his quick mind adapting to the strange half-language they had developed. But this question, seemingly simple, lay beyond their limited means of exchange. Marcus hesitated, glancing down at the letter. How to explain the concept of writing to a mother when they had no shared word for mother? He could have summoned Lucius, whose gift for mimicry and expression had made him their unofficial translator, or Broken Nose, who had picked up more Gallic phrases than any of them through his interactions with the camp's other prisoners. Instead, he reached for the stylus again and began to draw in a small corner of the tablet. Not letters this time, but a simple figure, a woman with arms outstretched. He pointed to the drawing, then to himself, making a cradling motion with his arms as though holding a child. "Mother," he said carefully, the Latin word meaningless to Ambrix, but paired with the gesture and drawing to create context. Understanding dawned slowly on Ambrix's face, not immediate comprehension, but the gradual recognition of meaning conveyed through multiple channels. His eyes moved from the drawing to Marcus's face, then back to the letter, connecting the disparate elements into a coherent whole. "Mother," he repeated, his accent thickening the Latin word until it became almost unrecognizable, but the attempt itself, the willingness to try the foreign sounds, represented a bridge between them. Marcus nodded encouragingly, pointing first to the drawing, then to the letter. "Mother," he confirmed, "letter to mother." Ambrix studied the arrangement for a long moment, his expression shifting through a series of emotions too complex to name. Curiosity, understanding, and something deeper that Marcus couldn't quite identify. Then, with a movement so deliberate it seemed to carry its own gravity, the Gallic youth reached for the object that hung from his belt. The carved boar token caught the lamplight as Ambrix lifted it, the small wooden figure polished by years of handling. Unlike his other possessions, which had been taken when he was captured, the token had been allowed to remain, too insignificant for the Romans to bother confiscating, too precious for Ambrix to relinquish even when threatened. He held it up between them, his dark eyes meeting Marcus's directly. Then, with careful precision, he repeated Marcus's earlier gestures, pointing to the token, then to himself, making the same cradling motion, though with a subtle difference that suggested the boar represented not just family, but something larger, tribe, perhaps, or identity itself. "Mother," Ambrix said again, the word still awkward on his tongue, but carrying a weight of meaning that transcended its imperfect pronunciation. The revelation settled into Marcus's consciousness with unexpected force. This proud warrior, captured in battle and held as prisoner of Rome's advance, had a mother somewhere, a woman who had cradled him as a child, who had watched him grow into the fighter who now sat across from Marcus. Not a faceless enemy, not merely a captive to be interrogated and eventually exchanged, but a son who had left someone behind, just as Marcus had. The recognition changed something between them, not erasing the realities of their situation, but adding a dimension that had been missing. They were enemies by circumstance, captor and prisoner by the fortunes of war. But beneath those imposed identities lay a simpler truth. Two young men far from home, connected by the universal human experience of having been loved, of having left that love behind when duty or necessity called them away. Marcus reached for the small flask of watered wine and poured a measure into 2 shallow cups, his own and Lucius's, borrowed for the occasion. He pushed one across the table toward Ambrix, who accepted it with a single nod that acknowledged both the gesture and what it represented. They drank in silence, the moment stretching between them, neither quite friendship nor the simple tolerance of necessity, but something in between that had no name in either of their languages. When Ambrix set his empty cup down, his eyes returned to the letter, studying it with new understanding. "Good," he said, the single Latin word, one of the few in his limited vocabulary. He accompanied it with an upward gesture of his thumb, a Roman signal for approval that he had clearly observed and adopted. Marcus smiled despite himself. "Yes," he agreed. "Good." The moment passed as naturally as it had arrived, neither forced nor prolonged beyond its natural duration. Ambrix rose with the same careful grace that had characterized his entrance, stepping back to the boundary of accepted behavior that defined a captive's movement through Roman space. When he had gone, the tent felt simultaneously emptier and more inhabited, the absence of his presence somehow more noticeable than his actual arrival had been. Marcus sat for a moment, the stylus balanced between his fingers, before returning to his interrupted task. The letter needed completion, a proper closing, his name clearly written, the date and location included for his mother's reference. He wrote these with careful precision, each character formed with the same attention to detail that he brought to his engineering work. When the writing was done, he folded the tablet carefully along its natural crease, pressing the wax surfaces together to seal his words inside. From his small leather purse he extracted 3 copper coins, nearly half his monthly pay after deductions. These he pressed into the folded wax, feeling them leave slight indentations in the soft surface. A tangible piece of himself to accompany his words home, money that would purchase bread, oil, perhaps a length of cloth for his mother to make into a new tunic. Not much, but something. He reached for the small pot of sealing wax that sat beside his lamp, a luxury most common soldiers couldn't afford, but one that Marcus had purchased with his first month's pay. The red substance softened quickly in the lamp's flame, dripping onto the folded edge of the tablet in a small, perfect circle. Into this he pressed his father's signet ring, the only item of value he had brought from home besides the medallion. The eagle emblem left its impression in the cooling wax, official confirmation that the letter came from his hand. His final task remained. The earlier drafts, the abandoned attempts that contained the truths he couldn't send, lay beside the lamp where he had set them after writing. These he held over the flame one by one, watching as the wax softened, then melted, dripping onto the small fire in reluctant tears. Each sizzling drop carried away a fragment of the reality he couldn't share. The burned village, the weeping children, the hollow-eyed stare of the woman who had lost everything to Rome's advance. When the last fragment had been consumed, Marcus sat back, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. His letter to his mother lay completed before him, a careful construction of edited memories that revealed nothing of what the campaign had truly cost. Beside it, his father's medallion caught the lamplight, the bronze surface worn smooth by years of handling. Somewhere in the camp beyond his tent, Ambrix would be returning to whatever duties had been assigned to him, perhaps helping prepare the evening meal or carrying water for the officers' horses. The Gallic youth moved through the Roman world with the careful precision of a man walking a narrow path between acceptance and resistance. Present, but never quite belonging, participating but never fully a part of what surrounded him. Not so different from Marcus himself, who built bridges across physical divides while the greater distances between what he had been and what he was becoming remained unspanned. 2 young men from different worlds, connected by a moment of recognition that changed nothing about their circumstances, yet somehow altered everything about how they occupied the same space. Marcus carefully placed his sealed letter in the pouch that would carry it to the next courier heading for Rome. By the time it reached his mother's hands, he would be miles from here, deeper into German territory, building the next bridge, burning the next village, becoming someone she might not recognize when finally he returned. But for now, in this moment between one day and the next, he had maintained the connection that tethered him to the person he had been before Caesar's war claimed him. It would have to be enough. Thanks for listening to Eagle's Edge. New chapters drop every Thursday, and The Making of a Soldier, Book 1 of Eagle's Edge, is now available on Amazon. If you liked Eagle's Edge, listen to Iron Rails and Ruin on Fridays. A 14-year-old engineer in 1882 Montana finds out his father is alive, and the syndicate has 14 days to take every locomotive in the territory. Now, back to Eagle's Edge. Marcus sat in his tent by lamplight and tried to write his mother the truth about what a Roman soldier does. and found out that some things a son cannot say to his mother, even in a letter. What truth in your life is too big to say out loud to the people you love? In chapter 15, Marcus turns the medallion in his palm and asks himself what kind of soldier he's going to be. This is Reed Sterling. Thank you for listening to Compass and Codex. Never stop exploring unknown worlds.